Good evening, good evening, good evening to everybody who's listening to me under the sound of my voice. This is Dr. Soul Brother um, talking to you tonight about something I feel is very, very important. Well, first of all, before I get started, I want to acknowledge that it has been 14 years now since the passing of Michael Jackson, who passed June 25th, 2009. So I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that, and that's going to tie into my topic. My topic deals with the fact that June, contrary to what's out there now, June is Black Music Month. For those of you all who don't know or didn't know before, Black Music Month came into existence. Well, first of all, let me back up. You had what is called uh, Black Music Association, came into being in 1978 and was created in Los Angeles. And people who were at that meeting were people like Smokey Robinson, Reverend Jesse Jackson, and a bunch of others. Maybe somewhere down the road, I'll do a program on that. But the following year, um, Black Music Month came into existence, and um, then President Jimmy Carter signed off on that. So we've had Black Music Month since 1979. So it's been a minute, 40 plus years. Now, I want to focus today's program or this evening program on the Jackson Five. And you wonder, well, how does that tie in to Black Music Month? Here's the deal. I want to focus on the Jackson Five because for a while now, a lot of people, when you mention Michael Jackson, they're not aware that Michael Jackson sang with his brothers, if you can believe that. Not only they're not aware that he sang with his brothers as the Jackson Five when they were growing up, but also when they left Motown and went to Epic Records and became the Jacksons. To my surprise, my astonishment, there are some young people who are not aware of that. The other problem is the furthest some people can go back is to the Thriller era, which is Michael's um, solo album that he recorded and released in 1982. And that album became very, very popular in 1983. So a lot of people overlooked that, overlooked the fact that his career started way before then. Well, anyway, here's the thing. I want to go back to when he and his brothers come out of Gary, Indiana, which is in the Midwest, and that community at that time. Remember, Michael was born August 29th, 1958. He come out of a family of originally 10 children. A lot of people overlook and don't realize that his brother Marlon, who was born a year and change before Michael, had a twin brother named Brandon. But unfortunately, Brandon died, I believe, the day after his birth. So it ended up being 9 children instead of 10. One could say that had Brandon lived, he would have been part of uh, the singing group, the Jackson Five, which probably would have been Jackson Six. But at any rate, I digress. Here's the point: when you look at Michael Jackson and his family coming out of Gary, Indiana, in the 1950s and 60s was a working class neighborhood that consisted of black folk who, for the most part, had migrated from the American South. Now, Michael Jackson's parents, Joseph Jackson, um, coming from Arkansas, and Mrs. Catherine Jackson coming from Alabama. So, when you look at the Jackson parents, they were indicative of a lot of other black folk who lived in that community in those days, who many of whom came from places like Mississippi and places like that. And there were quite a few people who are from Gary who have roots in Mississippi. And when you look at it, it makes sense because look at where Indiana is in relation to Illinois. And a lot of folk, not exclusively, but a lot of people who left the South and moved to Chicago, Illinois, came from Mississippi. And when you look at where Indiana is in relation to um, Illinois, they're neighbors. So it makes sense that you would have black folk who left Mississippi and moved to a place like Indiana. But again, it was not exclusively Mississippians. You had other folk who moved to Indiana from other parts of the South. But getting back to this Black Music Month, I think it's imperative, very critical, that we recognize Black Music Month. And when you look at Black Music Month, when it was created in the late 70s, as the 1970s was winding down, there was a recognition of the different genres of music that were created by black folk in America. When that music was when Black Music Month was recognized in 1979, this was at the height of Funkville, I call it. And when I say Funkville, I'm not just talking about the P Funk with Parliament Funkadelic. It's them to be sure, but also Confunction, the Brothers Johnson, Cameo, Ohio Players, etc. Those are the kind of artists that I remember growing up that was very, very popular back in the day. Well, I want to focus on the Jackson Five for this reason, and then I'll delve further into Black Music Month. The Jackson Five represented black culture at that time during their coming up in the 50s and 60s in that community. Um, the music that Michael Jackson and his brothers were exposed to, his father, who one could say was an irreligious man, not atheist, but irreligious, he was more secular than Mrs. Jackson. Um, Joe Jackson exposed his sons to blues music. Well, again, he's a Southerner. He's from Arkansas, and blues music was popular. In fact, Joe Jackson was not the only one in that Gary community who dealt with blues. That was pretty much commonplace back at that time. Um, and he worked as a steel worker. He was in this working in the steel mill at that time. So again, a lot of his fellow workers who were black were Southern migrants like himself. And with that came a lot of the customs, values, etc. And when you look at Mrs. Jackson, who, as I said, come out of Alabama, she used to like to listen to country music, according to what the Jacksons have stated. But not only did she listen to country music, she also listened to black gospel music. So what that means is the Jacksons in their home were exposed to Haley Jackson, Five Blind Boys of Alabama, Five Blind Boys of Mississippi, Sam Cooke and the Soulsters, all of those kind of recordings from back in those times. So even though the Jacksons were raised as Jehovah's Witnesses, we have to remember prior to Jehovah's Witness conversion in the early 60s, Mrs. Jackson was a Baptist. So undoubtedly, as young children, before they made that conversion, they were attending a Baptist church in the community. Now you couple that with the kind of music that they were exposed to, the gospel music that they were exposed to, the blues music they were exposed to, not to mention in the 1960s, they were exposed to Motown. I mean, if you were black in America, you were listening to Motown music back in those times. I mean, you had other people, regardless of color, who were listening to Motown. But I'm just saying, if you were black, you were black. That was a given. You were listening to Motown. Well, anyway, when you look at what was happening back at that time, um, if you listen to Michael Jackson was what they call an old soul, and the way that he had a way of singing with such emotion and feeling, which ties into something that Dr. W. Du Bois talked about, and that is the souls of black folk. That was something that was critical back then. And I doubt very seriously in today's environment that you would have, in fact, I wouldn't say I doubt, you notice that you don't have a modern day Michael Jackson today. And there's a reason for that. Because unfortunately, in our community, unlike back in the day, um, our social infrastructure was different. Many black folk were churched back in the day. Why do you think when you listen to some of the music from the Jackson Five, Curtis Mayfield, um, uh, Gladys Knight, Marvin Gaye, etc. You can hear that church, Sam and Dave, you name them. You could hear the church influence in their music, even when they were singing secular. It's the same thing with the Jackson Five back in the day. Again, the type of emotion that Michael was singing with, and that sort of thing. Well, as Michael was getting older, you could hear his voice maturing. Now, he already had a mature sound as a 10, 11-year old, but it was getting even better. In fact, um, as he grew into his teen years, going into young adult, you could hear that, for example, when you listen to All I Do Is Think of You, which in my judgment, All I Do Is Think of You is a better version than Troop's later version, but that's a conversation for another day. I know there's some people who may disagree with me. That's well and good. That's fine, but I'm holding on to my position. But anyway, um, Michael Jackson was 17 when he and his brothers, as the Jackson Five, recorded the song "All I Do Is Think of You," and you could hear that maturity in his voice. Then fast forward a little bit. That was 1975. Fast forward to 1978 when the movie The Wiz, Michael started as playing the Scarecrow. And of course, for those who don't know, The Wiz is a black version of The Wizard of Oz. Well, when you listen to Michael Jackson, You Can't Win, you can hear the soul in his voice. You got that back in the day. In today's environment, you don't really get that. And that's very unfortunate. But one of the problems is you don't get that um, is because we've gotten away from a lot of things pertaining to the for example, we've gotten away from the black church. We've gotten away from the church. And if you notice, back in the day, you would get that kind of a soulful style from the black church because the black church was reflective of the times, and it also spoke to the um, experience of black people in this country. As Reverend Jesse Jackson stated at Wattstax Festival in 1972, our experience determines the taste, determines the texture. Because if you notice, nobody sounds like Black America. That's not um, a way of trying to brag. That's not a way of trying to be, how do you say, um, I'm losing my train of thought now. But um, those are just the fact. If you know, in fact, if you notice, other black folks outside of these borders have tried to sound like Black America in many ways, the soulful style. Now, some of them have acknowledged it, others um, have not acknowledged it, but that's again a conversation for another day. But getting back to this thing with the Jackson Five, and I'm gonna tie this on into Black Music Month. Um, that style that Michael Jackson sang with is clearly a gift from God, clearly, and you also get this with other black artists. And so in the late 1970s, going into the 80s, when Black Music Month was created, this is a way of recognizing that, and let's be clear, this was not a way to try to recognize black foreign music. This was something that was created to recognize music that is organic here in the United States, created by black folk. And so what has happened, unfortunately, in recent years, I couldn't help but notice that the thing with uh, um, the recognition of Black Music Month and our contributions to American soil have been pushed to the back burner, if not kicked to the curb altogether. And I felt it was my duty to try to remind everybody that June is Black Music Month. And just like Black History Month, it's a time to recognize those things that Black folks in America have created and contributed to the overall American society. It's just like when Black History Month comes around in February. That's a way of us being recognized for the great contributions that we've made in American society. Well, it's similar as it relates to Black Music Month. It's dealing with the music that we created, and it doesn't have to do with a particular genre. We've created. You think of all of the genres: Negro spirituals during slavery. Then after slavery, you had Black gospel music. Then you had country music. Then you had and all this not necessarily in this order, but you had things like ragtime with people like Scott Joplin. I would encourage anybody to look those people up. Scott Joplin with ragtime music. Then you had country music. Then you had blues. Then you had big band. Then you had jazz. And big band, of course, is a part of a different another type of jazz because you had variety of different type of jazz. You had bebop. Then you had R&B, doo wop, which is a form of R&B, soul music. What else? Funk. Then of course rap music, etc. All of these genres that we as black people in this country have created. So Black Music Month is just as significant as Black History Month. Because the fact of the matter is, whether you're talking about Black History Month and the achievements and accomplishments of black people in America is American history. Black Music Month is American history. Why? Because anything that takes place within the confines of America is American history. Plain and simple. Plain and simple. Now, those naysayers out there who want to try to throw shade on things pertaining to us celebrating our history and culture within America, you need to step back and keep your hangups to yourself and not impose those hangups on other people because that already has had a negative effect. And at this stage in game, we cannot afford that. Black music is something that we created on this soil. And if you notice, other people, be they black foreigners, be they Africans, Caribbeans, um, other non-blacks in this country and elsewhere outside of these borders, they have all been in some form or fashion tried to mimic the black American. Those are the facts. And if you have a problem with acknowledging those things that we created on American soil by virtue of the fact that they were created outside of Mother Africa, then you clearly have got a problem. And so I would strongly suggest that you engage in self or personal inventory because at this stage we cannot afford that. You have now become a liability. So you need to engage in self inventory at this stage. You really do. Now, um I said I didn't want to dwell all of my time on the Jackson 5, although I felt compelled to do this because again, um it bothers me frankly that Michael Jackson is not remembered as somebody who was with his brothers, and whether it was the Jackson Five or as the Jacksons. And I can tell you this: when he was with the Jackson Five, his brothers, that is when it was clear that these were brothers with soul. The way they performed, the way they sang, all of that. Now, I never saw the Jackson Five perform as the Jackson Five. What I did see was when they performed as the Jacksons. In fact, I saw them perform at the Forum in Inglewood, California, in September 1981, which was the um, Triumph tour. And I can tell you, I had a blast. That was the concert right there. This is before Victory and all of that, because Victory don't come into existence until the Victory tour is not until 1984, about 3 years later. But the Triumph tour is the one that I attended and I enjoyed. I had a ball. I really did. And then you got your money's worth. But anyhow, this thing about um, Black Music Month, I think it's important that excuse me, we recognize our artists, living or dead. We recognize our artists, living or dead, and the role that they have played and the contributions that they've made in our culture. And when I say our culture, the American culture overall, the Black culture in particular, that is important. And while I'm on it, the fact of the matter is, one of the things that is important for any group to do is to make great contributions in the society in which they come out of. And it could never be said that Black Americans have not made great contributions in our society. Okay? Because the fact of the matter is, in the words of Curtis Mayfield, this is our country. Okay? And so other people recognize our beauty and the things that we've done and continue to do. And for you to be a part of this community and not recognize it and be a naysayer says a lot about you. And because we're now at a point where, again, there needs to be self inventory, and we're going to have to straight up chin check you for being out of order at this point. So I'm not going to go off into that too much, but I just felt that that was necessary to go there, and because that's important because um, I'm believing that one of the reasons why Black Music Month is not being recognized, there are other factors I'm not going to go into right now, but one of the reasons why it's been pushed to the back burner is because there's some people who don't see the significance of it. But they don't see the significance of it because they take their stuff for granted. And the other thing is when and if you are going to recognize it, let's be clear. You recognize the music, the different genres that were created here that are American, that are Black American, not Haitian, not Jamaican, not any African society, and that's not to be disrespectful. But the fact of the matter is, look, if you think that if you were in Trinidad or Jamaica or Belize or someplace, and they're recognizing reggae music and other genres that were created by Black Jamaicans in Jamaica, and someone tried to include other genres from other societies, including this one, including the United States, that would be a problem and it would be downright disrespectful. So don't try to do that over here. That's all that's being said. And the fact of the matter is, again, if anyone hasn't thought about it, I would seriously recommend that you consider or reconsider this. If you want us to, first thing, there needs to be a recognition more so of the music that we created here. That's number one. But also look at how and why the Jackson Five were so soulful, Gladys Knight was so soulful, Aretha Franklin, etc. All of them, in some form or fashion, had their roots in the Black church. And I say, and I will say till the cows come home. One of the reasons why you don't find soul in Black music today is because many of your artists are unchurched, unlike artists from yesteryear. Okay, so that needs to be made abundantly clear. That's part of the problem. So if you say, well, we seem to have lost our soul, and if you notice, no one really uses the term soul. What has happened is the term soul has been replaced with swag. Well, back in the day, it was soul. Remember, there was a song in the late 60s, I want to say 1968, called Soulful Strut. There was a song by Dyke and the Blazers, I think his name, back in the 60s. We Got More Soul. Um, all of that. How you think that what's Archie Bell and the Drells could make a song? Um, Lord, I'm drawing a blank right now. He made a song in the late 60s that was very, very popular. Um, Tighten Up, Tighten Up. And what's the song? What's the lyric? Hi, everybody. I'm Archie Bell and Drells from Houston, Texas. We not only sing, but we dance just as good as we walk. See, back in those days, we walked and talked with soul. You don't see that now. So, in order to bring that soul back, we need to get in tune with those things that we had going before we were rudely interrupted. And one day soon, I'm going to deal with that interruption. How some of that interruption was internal, was self inflicted. Okay. And um, let's understand this, those of the so called conscious community and the ones who call themselves woke, yeah, I'm talking to you. You don't have the soul of those who came before. That's a fact. And I challenge anybody to prove me wrong. You can't do it. No, you don't have the same soul. You so when people say, well, rudely, we're not our ancestors. Well, you know what? You're not your ancestors, but you're not your ancestors for different reasons, not for the reason you think. You say that because you somehow have been convinced that you are superior to them. But anyway, I'm going to end this right now and say that whenever Black Music Month comes around, it's important. And I would suggest that we play the records of Jackie Wilson, play the records of Aretha Franklin, play the records of uh, James Brown, and the music of the funk era, like Rufus and Shaka Khan and the Brothers Johnson and the P Funk era, Earth, Wind, and Fire, that kind of stuff. When you hear that, first of all, you're hearing real instruments, number one, and number two, these are people with who are singing with soul and conviction, similar to how a young Michael Jackson did. You weigh things on a scale. You listen to the music of that time period, and then you listen to today's music. I guarantee you, you will see and hear the difference. And again, whether you're talking about Sly and the Family Stone or a bunch of others, one of the reasons why, the main reason why those artists sounded different because they sang with soul that came from the black church. And unfortunately, in today's environment, the church has been compromised big time. And so, because of that, you don't get, well, that's part of it. I was about to say, you don't get the soul that you had from yesteryear, but also, as I said earlier, some of these artists are unchurched. They don't have a church come out of a church background. So that's why you have what you have. So again, um, remember Black Music Month and also remember Juneteenth. And um, that's important. I would encourage everybody by 2024, there should be a concerted effort to really highlight Juneteenth and forget about those who try to co-opt it. Give pushback to those who are trying to co-opt it. But also, while you may have some people trying to co-opt it, hey, Juneteenth is important, and we should be very festive and celebratory when it comes to Juneteenth. Juneteenth. Same thing with Black Music Month. Put on the music, please. Put on the music of yesteryear, and I guarantee you, if you expose your children, and by extension, grandchildren, the young children who weren't even a thought of when this music came out, and then you expose them, or rather, they listen to today's music, they should be able to arrive at the conclusion, hey, this music from back in the day is the bomb. Oh, I see how Michael Jackson, how can I sound like that? Well, in order to understand that, you got to tap into the Jackson Five's background, the kind of music is like, again, that they were exposed to them. The father exposed them to the more secular music. The mother exposed them to the more uh, black gospel music back at that time. So those are when you understand. Once we tap into that, then down the road, and we get out of this demoralization that we're in. Again, that's a story for another day. You will begin to see a difference. Don't you find it interesting that as bad as things were when we were under the lash, so to speak, of institutional racism, and it does exist today, but when things were um, suffocating racism, I'd call it, you heard the souls of black folk. Now you don't get that. So we've got a lot of inventory, self inventory that needs to take place, and diving into those things that help to shape our people. And, and central to that was and has been our faith. There's no circumventing that. So, on that note, I want to wish everyone a good evening. And for the rest of June, really focus on the music that our people created on American soil that kept us afloat, and also recognize that that music that we created, other people have tried to imitate outside of these borders, including folk who look like us outside of these borders. Okay, that's important. So by 2024, hopefully, by God's grace, we'll get a chance to really bring back the recognition and appreciation of the music that we created. And down the road, in the not too distant future, we can um, get back to the kind of funk music and other types of music that made us really rock the house. So please, those who are listening, hit that subscription button, hit the subscribe button. Love to get your thoughts in the comments section and all of that. And until the next time, God bless.